Prepare to witness the humiliation of an elderly man mistaken for a beggar in a luxury Manhattan bank. They laughed and judged, but what happens next reveals a secret that could destroy careers. What is the true price of arrogance? Find out now. Subscribe and leave a like so you don't miss this electrifying story. The Grand Sterling and Trust on Fifth Avenue wasn't just a bank. It was a marble sanctuary for Manhattan's financial elite. On that cold Tuesday morning in November, the air inside was thick with expensive perfume and the scent of high-grade paper, a stark contrast to the figure who stumbled through the revolving door. An elderly, thin man bundled in a faded tweed coat that looked like it had seen more winters than Central Park. This was Elias Vance. In one hand, he clutched a creased, plain brown envelope that looked like it contained a 1998 gas bill, and in the other, a cane with a worn brass ferrule, which, to a discerning eye, wasn't a common tramp's stick, but an antique naval artifact. His bright eyes, however, scanned the opulent lobby with a familiarity no one noticed. The clients, suited in Brooks Brothers and Ralph Lauren, and the employees, all with the polish of those under the Wall Street spotlight, immediately stopped what they were doing to stare at the intruder. This was not the kind of person who usually entered the Grand Sterling, unless they were looking for a place to get warm. Elias, ignoring the stares of disdain mixed with amusement, headed to the first teller window, manned by Tiffany, a young, immaculate clerk with the posture of a Greek statue. "Excuse me, young lady." Elias's voice was raspy but carried an old-world politeness. "I'm having a small issue with my account. It seems to have been frozen or something. I can't access it." He extended the brown envelope. Tiffany barely looked at the artifact, her top-to-bottom glance fixed on Elias's gloves, which had a hole in the thumb. With her fingertips, she took the envelope as if it were a soiled tissue. "Sir, are you sure you have the right location?" Tiffany asked, the question itself a statement. She didn't even open the envelope. "This is the Grand Sterling and Trust. Generally our clients," she paused, searching for a subtle word, "have access to more active accounts." Elias offered a weary smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I insist, child. Please check. I'm certain it's here. Just check the code." Reluctantly, Tiffany picked up the phone, and without masking her boredom and the scrutiny of her colleagues, she called the manager's office. "Mr. Harrington," she whispered dramatically, "we have a gentleman here. He insists he has a frozen account, but frankly, he looks like he's come from the soup line. He wants to speak with you. It's about an account code." Inside, Chad Harrington, a man in his early 40s whose confidence was proportional to the price of his Rolex watch, watched Elias from afar through the mirrored glass. He was moments away from receiving a billionaire client for a high-stakes mergers and acquisitions lunch. "Tiffany, is he our kind of client?" Chad asked, his voice loud enough to be heard over the phone. That detail was crucial for his productivity. "I'm not certain, sir, but he is very persistent." "Tell him I'm tied up in a high-level negotiation," the manager replied, impatience coloring every syllable. "Have him wait in the lounge area. If he leaves, all the better. Otherwise, when I'm finished, if I'm in a good mood, I'll see what he wants." With a strained smile that looked painful, Tiffany returned to Elias. "Sir, Manager Harrington is in an important meeting. You must wait in the lounge. He will see you, if he has time." The old man merely nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line, and he headed to the luxurious waiting area, which looked like a classic movie set. He sat on a Chesterfield leather sofa, the cane resting beside him, and the silence around him was louder than any shout. He just waited. And in Wall Street, time is money. As Elias settled into the plush leather, he deliberately positioned the envelope on his lap. He could hear the low, dismissive chatter among the staff, their words stinging like tiny needles. Then, as a wealthy investor walked by and sneered openly, Elias raised his hand slightly, his thumb brushing over the brass ferrule of his cane. It wasn't just old metal. Discreetly etched into the brass was a tiny, stylized GS&T, the original monogram of the Grand Sterling and Trust. He wasn't waiting for a meeting. He was conducting an observation. The manager, Chad Harrington, was about to step out for his crucial M&A lunch. If Elias was still sitting there upon his return, how far would Chad go to clean up his lobby and remove the eyesore that threatened his perfect image? The time crawled by like sludge. Elias Vance remained seated, motionless, for nearly 40 minutes. Every passing client whispered. The most common words were vagabond or lunatic. The contempt was almost palpable. a cloud of judgment hanging over the elderly man and his threadbare coat. Honestly, a well-dressed female client commented loudly to her husband, "It's an outrage. Grand Sterling shouldn't allow this kind of spectacle to scare away the people who actually matter." Elias heard everything. He saw the way Tiffany and the other staff members laughed discreetly, checking their watches. Elias's test was in full swing, and the bank was failing miserably. Just then, Malcolm, a young banker who worked in the back office with the less glamorous task of organizing digital files, emerged to grab a coffee. He was new to the city, and the New York ethic of ignoring the homeless still troubled him. He noticed the buzz and, upon seeing the man on the sofa, the silent humiliation he was enduring, felt a pang in his chest. Malcolm was the only one in the room not wearing a three-piece suit. He wore a knit vest and thick-rimmed glasses, and perhaps because of this, he was the only one who felt compelled to approach. "Excuse me, sir," Malcolm said, his voice hesitant but respectful. "I'm Malcolm. You've been waiting a while. Can I help? What is your business with the manager?" Elias looked up. For the first time in nearly an hour, he met a pair of eyes that weren't judging him. "Thank you, young man," Elias replied. "I need the manager to review an urgent document regarding my account. It's about the lock. I can't leave until it's resolved." "All right," Malcolm said, feeling responsible. "Stay here. I'll speak to Mr. Harrington right now." Malcolm headed to the office, where Chad had just finished his call with the investor, a foxy smile on his face. "Sir, I apologize for interrupting, but the elderly gentleman outside is getting impatient. He says it's an urgent matter about an account lock. He has that brown envelope." Chad rolled his eyes at the description. "Oh, that lunatic, I know. I told Tiffany to make him wait. He needs to get bored and leave. He must be a former client who lost everything and is trying a scam. Don't waste your time on this, Malcolm. Get back to your work and focus on the accounts that matter." But the patience of Elias Vance, who had built this bank from the ground up, finally ran out. He stood up, the navel cane striking the marble with an audible clack, and, to the horror of Tiffany and the clients, walked straight to Chad Harrington's office door. He didn't knock. He just opened the door and walked in. "Mr. Harrington," Elias said, and the manager, caught off guard, stammered, "I no longer have time to wait for your good mood." He placed the brown envelope on the polished cherrywood desk. "Here are the details of my account. I cannot perform any transactions. Tell me exactly what is happening." Chad, feeling invaded and humiliated in front of the rest of the staff, puffed out his chest. With the most condescending tone he could muster, he picked up the envelope. "Ah, of course, Mr. Vance," he said, quickly looking at the name. "Look, we don't even need to open this. Years of experience tell me that when an account is locked or inactive, it only means one thing in this type of bank. There's no balance, is there? You probably don't have enough money. I suggest you try a smaller retail bank. You are creating a disturbance in my lobby." Elias took a step back, his face devoid of emotion. He placed his hand on the handle of the navel cane. "I insist." Elias's voice was soft, yet icy. "Check the account. First the information, then the opinion. It is the golden rule of the founders." Chad laughed, a dry, mocking sound. "Are you giving me management advice?" "Please. I am the manager of the Grand Sterling Trust. I know exactly what I'm seeing. I respectfully recommend that you leave before I call security to clear the premises." Elias merely rested his palm on the cane, tilted his head, and said, before turning toward the door, "Very well, Manager Harrington. I will leave. But I promise you one thing. Your time will cost you more than any high-level transaction you could close today." Elias left the room, but not before looking at the desk, where the brown envelope remained, revealing the tip of a document inside, with the bank's watermark logo. Chad shrugged, turned to his secretary, and told her to call housekeeping. The matter was closed, but in the back office Malcolm couldn't ignore the look on the old man's face. He snatched the envelope from the manager's desk as Chad went out for lunch and went to his terminal, typing the account number he quickly saw on the document. He was about to find out that at Grand Sterling, the client who didn't matter was, in fact, the only person who truly mattered. Malcolm watched the screen fill with zeros. The amount was so astronomically high that he blinked, thinking it was a system error. But what made him gasp was the next line, in red letters, defining the client's relationship with the institution. Shareholding stake, 60%, status, founder and majority owner. The old man whom Chad Harrington had just driven out of the bank like a beggar was the owner of everything, and he had just been disrespected and humiliated. Malcolm could barely breathe, holding the printed sheet. What would he do with this explosive information? Would he tell the arrogant manager, knowing it would end Chad's career, or would he let the founder act, which could result in an even greater disaster at the Grand Sterling and Trust? Malcolm felt the world spin on the polished marble floor of the Grand Sterling and Trust. The sheet of paper in his hand, a crude printout from a secure system, felt like a live wire. It confirmed the terrifying truth. The man Chad Harrington had dismissed as a lunatic was Elias Vance, the founder and majority shareholder, the person who held 60% of the entire institution's fate in his weathered hands. The sheer audacity of manager Harrington's arrogance was breathtaking. He had scoffed at the golden rule of the founders right to the founder's face. Malcolm looked at the name Elias Vance again, remembering the historical plaque near the entrance, where Vance's portrait hung, albeit one from 40 years prior. The kind eyes were the same, but the power suit was long gone, replaced by the humble tweed. Chad, meanwhile, had just left the building, heading to his M&A lunch with the billionaire investor from Connecticut. He had been so focused on impressing the important client that he had physically brushed past the bank's actual owner without a second thought, his entire demeanor a walking contradiction to the bank's core values. Malcolm knew he held a ticking time bomb. If he told Chad now, the manager might panic, attempt to cover up the incident, or worse, try to manipulate the situation. If he kept quiet, Elias Vance was clearly setting up a catastrophic reaction for the bank's leadership. Taking a deep breath, Malcolm folded the document precisely and slipped it into his vest pocket. He walked back to his desk, trying to blend in, acutely aware of Tiffany and the other tellers staring at him, curious about his interaction with the eccentric old man. "Well, Malcolm, what did the tramp want?" Tiffany asked, a smirk playing on her lips. Malcolm simply shook his head. He left, said he'd settle his issue elsewhere. He offered a non-committal smile, his heart hammering against his ribs. He needed time to think. He needed to find out why Elias Vance had deliberately presented himself in such attire, and why his account had been temporarily locked. This wasn't just a coincidence. It felt like a test, a crucial stress test on the bank's integrity. He spent the rest of the afternoon in a fog, ostensibly working, but secretly running historical reports on the Vance account. He found complex, layered transaction data that showed regular, massive transfers to various charitable foundations and scholarship funds across the U.S., all initiated from a unique Founders Trust account. Elias Vance wasn't just wealthy. He was a philanthropist of the highest order, known for his anonymity. As the clock ticked closer to 5 p.m., Malcolm saw Chad Harrington return. He was beaming, a man who believed he had just sealed a multi-million-dollar deal. He paused near Tiffany's desk, accepting her compliments with a smug nod. Chad was clearly riding high on his perceived success, oblivious to the fact that his career was hanging by a thread, and that thread was currently residing in Malcolm's pocket. Malcolm knew this was his last chance. He had to at least try to warn the manager, to show the evidence that might salvage a sliver of integrity for the Grand Sterling. He walked toward Chad's office, the folded paper feeling heavy against his chest, determined to do the right thing, regardless of the consequences for himself. Malcolm stood outside Chad's office, about to knock, when the manager noticed him. Chad's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of condescending impatience. "What is it, Malcolm? Did you actually clean up that homeless man's mess? I'm busy closing out the paperwork on the Sterling Vanguard deal. Don't waste my time with more clerical nonsense." Malcolm hesitated, the words catching in his throat. He held out the printed report, his hand trembling slightly. "Sir, you really need to see this. It's about the gentleman who was here earlier, the one with the brown envelope. It's urgent." Chad didn't even glance at the paper. He simply waved a dismissive hand, the gesture reeking of superiority. "I told you, I'm not interested in that kind of client. File it. I'm sure it's just some old, insignificant account. I'm only interested in people who move the market, not those who beg for pennies. Now, if you'll excuse me." Chad then turned his back completely, focusing on his monitor, effectively sealing his own fate by refusing to look at the evidence that could save him. Malcolm lowered his hand, his duty done. He had tried. Malcolm now knew with absolute certainty that he would wake up to a massive financial earthquake the next morning. The question wasn't if Elias Vance would return for retribution, but what form that retribution and the fate of the bank's staff would take. Now that Malcolm was the only one with the truth, the night swallowed Manhattan and the opulence of the Grand Sterling and Trust went dark, a silent fortress of finance. Chad Harrington left the bank feeling supremely satisfied, certain that he had skillfully managed a tricky situation, the dismissal of an eccentric old man, while simultaneously securing a major deal. His confidence was unshakable, a characteristic that had propelled his career but was now about to become his undoing. Malcolm, however, spent a sleepless night in his small apartment in Brooklyn. The image of Elias Vance's disappointed face was etched in his mind, along with the horrifying fact sheet in his pocket. He thought about calling Chad, even anonymously, but realized the futility of it. Chad had made his decision, blinded by the very wealth he worshipped. Malcolm's focus shifted. He had tried to warn the captain of the impending iceberg. Now he could only prepare himself. He reviewed his actions of the day. He had treated Elias Vance with respect. He had offered help, and most importantly, he had attempted to bring the truth to management. He was the only employee who had upheld the bank's supposed principles. The next morning, Malcolm arrived early, the stress lines around his eyes betraying his worry. The bank floor was abuzz with its usual early morning efficiency, yet there was a nervous undercurrent. Tiffany and the other tellers were whispering about the strange old man who had caused a scene yesterday. Just as the clock struck 9 a.m., the revolving door spun slowly, admitting not one but two figures. The first was Elias Vance, dressed exactly as he had been the day before, in the faded tweed coat and the gloves with the hole in the thumb. But this time, his posture was different. He walked not with the hesitancy of a beggar, but with the measured, steady stride of a man who owned the very ground he walked on. The navel cane still hit the marble with the same clack, but now it sounded like a gavel. The second figure was a man in a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit, carrying an expensive leather briefcase. He looked like he had stepped off the cover of Forbes magazine. This man, whose name was Mr. Sterling, a nod to the bank's co-founder, was the current chief operating officer, COO, and head of the entire Vance Trust. Silence descended upon the Grand Sterling. The clinking of coffee cups and the tapping of keyboards ceased. Every single person, from the security guards to the senior brokers, watched the pair walk directly into the center of the lobby, stopping just short of Chad Harrington's glass office. Elias did not look at anyone but the glass-encased manager. He simply raised his hand and crooked a finger, summoning Chad like a naughty schoolboy. Chad Harrington, who had been reviewing a spreadsheet and expecting a congratulatory email from his M&A client, saw the old man. A look of annoyed recognition crossed his face, followed by panic when he saw the COO standing next to him. He hastily straightened his tie and bolted from his office. "Mr. Vance," Chad stammered, his mind racing for an excuse. The easy contempt of yesterday replaced by outright terror. I apologize for yesterday's delay. I was tied up with a vital client merger. How can I help you today?" Elias's eyes were cold, reflecting the harsh fluorescent light of the lobby. "It's too late for help, Mr. Harrington. I warned you yesterday that your actions would carry a heavy cost. You failed to uphold the one principle upon which this institution was built." Mr. Sterling, the COO, opened his briefcase. The sight of the expensive leather and the weight of the moment solidified the terrifying reality for Chad. This wasn't a disgruntled former client. This was an executive action. Mr. Sterling pulled out two perfectly crisp documents. The COO didn't offer a greeting or a handshake. He simply stared at Chad with an expressionless gaze. "Mr. Harrington," Sterling's voice was sharp and devoid of emotion, "these documents are effective immediately. This is the statement of termination of your employment as manager of the Grand Sterling and Trust. And this," he paused, holding up the second sheet, "is the transfer of your new post to our farm loan division in rural Nebraska. You are no longer authorized to access any Grand Sterling system." Chad's face went white, the color draining so fast he looked like a statue. He reached out to grab the papers, but his hand was shaking too violently. He tried to speak, but only a desperate, high-pitched plea escaped his throat. The manager, who had measured a man's worth by the price of his suit, was now utterly ruined in front of the same people he had lorded over. But the shock was not just for Chad. Who was the new manager? And what had Elias Vance decided about the fate of Tiffany and the other employees who had also laughed at him? Chad Harrington swayed on his feet, the sound of the COO, Mr. Sterling, detailing his new assignment in the Nebraska Farm Loan Division, drowning out the blood rushing in his ears. Who are you to fire me?" he choked out, desperation replacing his shock. "I have years of experience. I secured the Sterling Vanguard deal yesterday. You can't just... Elias Vance held up a hand, silencing the hysterical manager. His voice was calm, cutting through the absolute stillness of the Grand Sterling lobby like a knife through silk. I am the one who founded this bank, Mr. Harrington. I am the one who currently holds 60% of its shares. I can, and I just did. Your expertise, which you wear so proudly on your sleeve, failed the fundamental stress test of integrity. You judged me by the clothes on my back, a direct violation of the ethos I built this institution upon. Every employee and client in the room, especially those who had laughed or nodded along with Chad's dismissiveness the day before, felt a sickening lurch of realization. Tiffany slumped against her counter, her perfectly made-up face pale with terror. Elias then turned his attention to the rest of the silent staff. His eyes scanned the room, pausing briefly on Tiffany and then settling on Malcolm, who stood frozen near the back office, clutching the printout that was now redundant. The policies of the Grand Sterling Trust are simple, Elias announced, his voice echoing slightly in the grand hall. We treat every client, whether they arrive in a custom suit or a ragged coat, with the same respect, attention, and diligence. The wealth of a person is never to be assumed by their attire, for this bank was created to serve everyone, not just the elite of Manhattan. He walked a few steps closer to Chad. You have failed, Mr. Harrington. You were given the opportunity to simply look at the facts, the information on that envelope, and you chose arrogance instead. You had a young man, Elias paused, pointing directly at Malcolm, who tried to show you the evidence, and you dismissed him because he, too, was involved with an insignificant account. The weight of the accusation was crushing. Chad looked wildly at Malcolm, his mind finally connecting the dots. Elias then gestured to Mr. Sterling, the COO. Mr. Sterling, you have the second document, correct? Yes, Mr. Vance, Sterling confirmed, holding up the second sheet. Good. It's time to appoint a new manager. Someone who understands that a man's character is more valuable than his collateral. Elias's gaze fixed on Malcolm. Mr. Malcolm, step forward. Malcolm, heart hammering, stumbled forward, the weight of the moment almost too much to bear. Chad Harrington, seeing his chance slip away completely, pointed a trembling finger at Malcolm. Him! You can't be serious. He's a back-office grunt. He has no management experience. You're destroying this branch for a sentimental gesture. Elias Vance merely smiled, a genuine, powerful smile that transformed his tired face. Sentimental, perhaps, but necessary. Mr. Malcolm saw the need to help a client in distress, regardless of appearance. He had the decency you lacked, Mr. Harrington. Decency is the foundation of trust, and trust is the foundation of this bank. Mr. Sue. Sterling stepped forward, bypassing the distraught Chad, and handed the second document, a statement of promotion, to Malcolm. Effective immediately, Malcolm is the new manager of the Grand Sterling Trust, Fifth Avenue branch. Your first task, Mr. Malcolm, is to immediately terminate all ties with Mr. Harrington. The promotion was monumental, but Malcolm's new power instantly brought him a crushing moral dilemma. What action should he take against Tiffany and the other employees who had been just as dismissive and cruel as Chad, but whose fate Elias Vance had deliberately left in the new manager's inexperienced hands? Malcolm, his new statement of promotion clutched in his hand, stood amidst the rubble of Chad Harrington's career. The manager, defeated and sweating profusely, was now being escorted toward the doors by the two security guards who had watched the entire spectacle unfold. Elias Vance, the founder, then turned his gaze, a gaze that felt heavy with decades of accrued wealth and wisdom, toward Malcolm. Congratulations, Manager Malcolm. You've earned this. Now, let's discuss the matter of the remaining staff, starting with Tiffany. Tiffany flinched, straightening up instantly. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights, her earlier disdain replaced by genuine fear. She knew her dismissal was imminent. She was the one who had first rejected Elias, the one who had laughed the loudest. Elias walked slowly toward her guichet, his navel cane tapping rhythmically. Miss Tiffany, he said, his voice softer now, but infinitely more authoritative. You were the first point of contact. You saw the man and immediately assumed his worth, or lack thereof, based solely on his coat. You violated the rule. No distinction between rich and poor. Do you understand the severity of your actions? Tiffany, tears welling up, began to plead. Mr. Vance, please, I made a terrible mistake. It's the culture here. Mr. Harrington always emphasized the image of the clientele. I thought I was doing what the bank wanted. Elias stopped a few feet from her. The culture of this branch, under Mr. Harrington, was indeed toxic. However, a rule is a rule. You work for a prestigious institution, and part of that prestige is maintaining a high ethical standard. You failed that standard completely. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. Tiffany sobbed, waiting for the final word. The document that would send her away just like Chad. "I will not fire you today, Miss Tiffany," Elias finally stated. The relief that washed over Tiffany was so visible it was painful. But Elias wasn't finished. "I grant you a single, non-negotiable reprieve. Your mistake was born of following a bad leader and poor judgment, not malice. However, if I or any of my newly appointed auditors hear a single complaint or witness one instance of disrespect toward any client, regardless of their perceived status, you will be terminated immediately. You have much to learn about true service, and your job is now to teach yourself." He then looked at Malcolm. "Manager Malcolm, this is now your responsibility. You must instill the correct principles, not just the focus on profits. If the ethics fail, the bank fails." Elias then looked pointedly at the entire group of now terrified employees. "I want you all to learn from this. I want you to understand that the character of the people who run this bank is more important than the amount of money in its vault." Elias Vance turned to the COO, Mr. Sterling. "Let's go. We have a press conference to manage." He then paused at the revolving door and looked back one last time at Malcolm, the young man now standing alone in the center of the giant, silent lobby. "Manager Malcolm," Elias called out, a cryptic hint in his voice. "I left my brown envelope on Manager Harrington's desk yesterday. It contained the proof of my account and, more importantly, a hidden message I had intended for the management team. I trust you'll find it and understand its significance. It is your first real test." Elias Vance and the COO stepped out into the bright light of Manhattan, leaving Malcolm alone with a promotion he wasn't sure he could handle, a staff he couldn't trust, and a nagging question. What vital, hidden message was concealed within that mundane, discarded brown envelope that the arrogant Chad Harrington had refused to even touch? Malcolm, now the youngest manager in the history of the Grand Sterling and Trust Fifth Avenue branch, felt the immense weight of his new title. The silence in the lobby was oppressive, filled with the resentful glares of the staff who had just witnessed the meteoric fall of their old boss and the sudden rise of a back-office grunt. His first task, immediately after the founder's departure, was a symbolic one: retrieve the infamous brown envelope from Chad Harrington's deserted office. He walked into the manager's vast, luxurious space. Everything spoke of arrogance and excess: the imported leather chairs, the panoramic view of Midtown, and the cherry wood desk where Chad had laughed at Elias Vance. The envelope lay exactly where Elias had placed it, a final silent accusation. Malcolm picked up the simple rough paper. It felt strangely light. He already knew its main content, the account details proving Elias Vance's 60% ownership. But Elias had specifically mentioned a hidden message intended for the management team. He carefully opened the flap. Inside, there was the account statement, showing a staggering, multi-billion-dollar balance, but tucked behind it was a small, folded piece of parchment that looked ancient, certainly not bank-issued. Malcolm unfolded the parchment. It was a faded handwritten letter, dated over 40 years ago, the year the bank was founded. The signature at the bottom was E. Vance. The message was brief and profound. To the future stewards of the Grand Sterling and Trust, this bank was founded on a loan of $5,000, given to me by a humble tailor who judged my potential, not my poverty. That tailor's trust is the true cornerstone of this institution. Should you ever forget that principle, that every person, regardless of appearance, carries potential, you will lose more than money. You will lose integrity. Consider this your final, permanent warning. The message sent a shiver down Malcolm's spine. The code Elias had mentioned to Tiffany wasn't just a simple account number. It was the moral code of the bank's origin. Elias had appeared as a beggar to see if his current management remembered the bank's humble foundation, the tailor's trust. They hadn't. Now, Malcolm had to implement that code immediately. He looked out into the lobby. The staff was watching him, waiting for his first move. His greatest challenge wasn't running the financials, but winning the loyalty of a hostile team. He knew what he had to do to establish his authority and, more importantly, to reshape the bank's toxic culture. He walked out of the office holding the ancient parchment in his hand. Malcolm stood behind the central bank counter, the most visible point on the floor. He cleared his throat. The noise instantly died down. "Attention, everyone." His voice was strong, carrying a new authority. "I understand this has been a shock, but yesterday was not a fluke. It was a necessary cleansing. From this moment on, the rules change." He then looked directly at Tiffany, who was still pale. "Miss Tiffany, I will hold you to the founder's reprieve, but your first task is non-negotiable. I want you to research the history of the $5,000 Taylor's loan and write a detailed report on how it shaped the Grand Sterling. If your report fails to capture the moral significance, you will be gone." He then held up the parchment. "This is the founder's warning," he announced to the entire floor. "I will have it framed and hung in the lobby by the end of the day. Every time you are about to judge a client by their appearance, look at this, because the founder is still watching, and so am I." As the staff dispersed, buzzing with the news, Malcolm realized the heavy truth. The founder may have promoted him, but the rest of the banking world, the arrogant investors, the ruthless competitors, and the New York elite, were about to see the former back-office grunt take over a major branch. His first day of management would be an unprecedented trial by fire. The news of the unceremonious firing of Chad Harrington and the shocking promotion of Malcolm, a back-office employee, ripped through Wall Street faster than a ticker tape. By midday, the Grand Sterling and Trust lobby was buzzing, not just with regular clients, but with reporters, rival bankers, and curious financial analysts. Malcolm's first few hours as manager were a whirlwind of damage control and aggressive restructuring. He had Mr. Sterling, the COO, on the phone, coordinating a press statement that would confirm the events while emphasizing the bank's recommitment to its ethical founding principles. His immediate priority was the staff. He watched Tiffany retreat into a corner, genuinely scared, diligently researching the Taylor's loan. He knew his mandate was to reform them, not just punish them. He gathered the senior staff, those who had silently condoned Chad's arrogance, for an emergency meeting in the newly vacated manager's office. "Look around," Malcolm stated, leaning against Chad's opulent desk. "This office, this view, this bank, it doesn't belong to me, and it certainly didn't belong to Mr. Harrington. It belongs to the principles the founder laid down, principles he tested yesterday, and you all failed." He continued, laying down the law with unexpected steeliness. "From now on, there will be no important and unimportant clients. I will personally review the surveillance footage of anyone who approaches a client dismissively. If I find any evidence of the kind of condescension we saw yesterday, there will be no second chances. My promotion wasn't a reward for being nice. It was a mandate to enforce integrity." Meanwhile, outside the bank, the financial community was already beginning to react. Many rival banks saw this as a sign of weakness, a massive financial institution being run by an inexperienced kid in a vest. The stock market reflected the uncertainty. The Grand Sterling's share price began to dip slightly as news outlets ran headlines focusing on the managerial coup and the eccentric founder. Malcolm knew the pressure wasn't just internal. He was about to face the ultimate test of his leadership. A meeting with Mr. Thomas Vanderbeek, one of the bank's oldest and most powerful clients, known for his cutthroat business style and immense wealth. Vanderbeek had called demanding to speak only with Chad Harrington, threatening to pull his multi-billion-dollar portfolio if he was forced to deal with the boy manager. This wasn't just a threat to Malcolm's job. It was a threat to the stability of the entire branch. Malcolm took a deep breath, adjusting the knot on his tie. He was about to meet the kind of client Chad Harrington lived to impress, a client who perfectly embodied the kind of elite judgment that had nearly cost the bank its ethical soul. He walked out to the reception area, where the formidable Vanderbeek was already waiting, tapping his foot impatiently. "You?" Vanderbeek sneered, looking Malcolm up and down with open contempt, exactly as Chad had done to Elias. "I assume you're the unfortunate interim placeholder. Where is Harrington? And don't waste my time with fairy tales about ethics. I came here to manage my assets, not to listen to your Boy Scout philosophy." Malcolm met his gaze, his voice calm and steady. "Mr. Vanderbeek, I am Manager Malcolm. Mr. Harrington is no longer with the bank. And regarding the fairy tales, I assure you, my philosophy is very simple. I value integrity over immediate profit. Now, you have a choice. You can trust the new manager to uphold the principles that built this bank, or you can join Mr. Harrington in finding a new institution. But let me be clear. If you stay, you will treat every employee here with respect. Are we agreed? Or should I start preparing your withdrawal papers? Malcolm had called the bluff of a financial titan in his very first face-to-face meeting. Vanderbeek blinked, stunned by the audacity of the new manager. Would the titan withdraw his massive portfolio and collapse the branch? Or would he respect the only man in years who hadn't bowed to his arrogance? Mr. Thomas Vanderbeek, the ruthless financial titan, stared at Malcolm for what felt like an eternity. No manager at the Grand Sterling and Trust, or perhaps any major Wall Street bank, had ever dared to issue him an ultimatum. He was used to obsequious deference, not a choice between ethical conduct and dismissal. Vanderbeek slowly pulled a leather chair from the corner and sat down, his movement deliberate. He didn't speak about his portfolio immediately. Instead, he studied Malcolm, the knit vest, the earnest eyes, the surprisingly calm demeanor. "You have courage, Manager Malcolm," Vanderbeek finally said, his voice flat. "Or perhaps you're simply naive. Do you realize that the money I control is equivalent to the entire annual GDP of some small nations? You are risking the stability of this branch for a sermon." "I'm risking nothing, sir," Malcolm countered, holding the gaze of the powerful client. "Mr. Vance, the founder, showed us all yesterday that true stability is built on integrity. If this bank can't hold its managers accountable, how can it hold its clients' fortunes? You claim to value stability. I am offering you a stable environment, built on principle, not just profit margins. If you find that sermon too costly, then perhaps this is not the right institution for you." The conversation continued for another half hour, not about interest rates or investment strategies, but about the principles of trust and respect. Vanderbeek, surprisingly, seemed intrigued. He had dealt with every type of greedy, self-serving banker, but never one who openly prioritized ethics over his massive funds. He saw a form of risk management in Malcolm's actions that he hadn't anticipated. Finally, Vanderbeek stood up. The entire floor held its breath, waiting for the devastating pronouncement. "Prepare the documents for an additional $10 million to be deposited into the founder's trust account," Vanderbeek announced, the corner of his mouth turning up slightly. "I want to support the bank's renewed focus on integrity, and inform your staff, young man, that I will be watching their conduct closely. I respect a man who risks his career to stand on principle." The tension in the Grand Sterling lobby instantly dissolved. Malcolm had not only survived the first major crisis, but had secured a new deposit. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner, Tiffany was visibly shaken, finishing her research on the Taylor's loan. She approached Malcolm, her report in hand, her eyes red from a sleepless night and fear. "Manager Malcolm," she whispered, handing him the detailed handwritten report. I found the story. It wasn't just a loan. The Taylor, Mr. Goldstein, didn't charge interest. He said the payment was future success and respect. I understand now. I was looking for the wrong kind of value." Malcolm took the report. "I believe you, Tiffany. Now frame the founder's warning and place it under the portrait of Mr. Vance. It's time for all of us to truly start learning the bank's history." As the bank settled into a new routine, driven by Malcolm's quiet authority and the immediate fear of being audited by the founder, Malcolm began to focus on his administrative duties. He was now overseeing multi-million-dollar deals, a monumental shift from organizing file folders. Late that evening, after the staff had left, Malcolm reviewed the official termination file of Chad Harrington. He noticed a small, seemingly insignificant detail, a discrepancy in a series of overseas transfers that Chad had approved just days before his firing. The amounts were small, but the regularity was unsettling. It looked like an internal loophole, a carefully constructed leak in the bank's secure vault. Elias Vance's test hadn't just been about ethical conduct, it might have also been about finding a flaw in the system. Was Chad's arrogance merely a symptom, and was the true threat to the Grand Sterling and Trust a hidden, ongoing scheme that Malcolm had just stumbled upon? Malcolm sat alone in the cavernous office, the glow of his computer screen reflecting the alarm in his eyes. The termination of Chad Harrington was not just an ethical cleanup. It appeared to be a timely removal of a potential corporate saboteur. The series of suspicious small overseas transfers Chad had approved in the days leading up to his firing pointed to a sophisticated financial leak, a possible scheme of embezzlement or insider trading, disguised as routine operations. He realized the full genius and necessity of Elias Vance's dramatic action. The founder hadn't just tested their integrity. He had created a controlled crisis that forced a change in management before any serious financial damage could be inflicted. By using his locked account as a pretext and his humble appearance as a screening device, Vance had flushed out the two biggest threats to the bank's ethos and solvency: the unethical manager and the complacency of the staff. Malcolm immediately initiated a forensic audit on all of Chad Harrington's recent approvals, working silently through the night. He secured the evidence of the fraudulent transfers, realizing that the Grand Sterling and Trust had been saved not just from bad ethics, but from potentially criminal activity. The next morning, the atmosphere in the bank was radically different. The framed founder's warning, the Taylor's story, hung prominently in the lobby, a constant reminder of the bank's true foundation. Tiffany, now earnest and diligent, greeted every client, regardless of their attire, with genuine warmth. The staff, realizing their new manager valued diligence and respect over flashy connections, worked with a renewed sense of purpose. Malcolm called Mr. Sterling, the COO, and presented the evidence of Chad's financial malfeasance. The consequences were swift and severe. A formal criminal complaint was filed, ensuring Chad's future would involve more than just a quiet post in Nebraska. The ethical cleansing of the Fifth Avenue branch was now complete. Later that week, Elias Vance returned one last time. He didn't come in costume this time. He was dressed in a simple, well-tailored suit, his naval cane still in hand. He walked straight to the new framed warning and smiled. He found Malcolm in the lobby, managing a busy line of customers. "Manager Malcolm," Elias said, his eyes twinkling, "you've proven that the greatest value in a bank is not the money it holds, but the character of the people who run it. You acted with integrity, diligence, and responsibility. The Grand Sterling and Trust is safe with you." Elias then looked across the newly humble and attentive staff. "I will be sending auditors, not to find fault, but to confirm the integrity of this change. You have all been given a second chance. Don't waste it." Elias turned to Malcolm and gave a final nod of approval. He didn't offer congratulations for the promotion, only a deep, meaningful thank you for understanding the true meaning of the code. As Elias Vance walked out, the banking world continued to spin. The stock prices stabilized, and the story of the founder's test became legendary, a tale whispered in the hallowed halls of Wall Street, as a cautionary warning that the biggest fortunes are often hidden beneath the plainest facades, and true leadership values decency over dollars. Malcolm watched the revolving door stop spinning, finally comprehending the immense responsibility he now carried. He was not just the manager of a bank, he was the custodian of its soul. He turned to Tiffany, who was smiling at a client in worn overalls. "Tiffany," Malcolm said quietly, "call the security firm. I want a complete audit of all back-office approvals from the last 12 months. We caught the thief, but we need to ensure every last loophole is closed. Because the most dangerous kind of corruption isn't always loud and arrogant like Chad. Sometimes it's silent and invisible, waiting for the next naive manager to look the other way." Malcolm's vigilance had only just begun. The founder was gone, the culprit was caught, but the work of protecting the bank's integrity from the unseen threats of the financial world was a continuous, lonely battle. Thank you so much for sticking with us until the very end. Your attention means the world. If you enjoyed this powerful lesson on respect and integrity, don't let the learning stop here. Subscribe right now and hit the notification bell, because we bring you a new, true-to-life story every day, a lesson that will make you stronger than you were yesterday. And before you go, tell us, what did you think of Malcolm's promotion? Drop a comment below and share your opinion.